welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Also, a really big thank you to Locklear for sharing the episode on Twitter. Obviously, they enjoyed it, which was really nice. So, comments, keep them coming. Really appreciate it. So this week, time for something a bit different. In the whole 10 odd years I've been doing this channel, I've yet to do an episode of the show on Calvados. Yeah, I know, bizarre, isn't it? It's just one of those things that I just don't often look for. Mainly because obviously it's the poor relation of the other two more well-known spirits that come out of France, and for years in the shop we've just had the one brand at the end of the day, because that's all that was really needed. And every now and again I've looked at other producers from time to time, and this episode of the show has actually been, I suppose, in the planning stages since 2017, would you believe it, when I got sent the samples of Lecompte Calvados. Now, I completely forget which company sent me them, so I do apologise for that. If you're watching the show and you are the distributor of Lecompte Calvados, I do apologise. But the plan was that they sent me the two samples, and I said, if you can rustle me up a few more from the range, I can do an entire episode of the show on them. But, you know, it just never happened for one reason or another. And it wasn't until last year when a company called Bunch and Bushel that distribute Toutain Calvados kindly sent me the samples of the three that they import. And I thought, you know what? About time I did an episode on Calvados. It's a sort of a really overlooked spirit in my opinion, and you know, I'm guessing there's a number of people that don't know actually what Calvados is. So a little bit of background. I won't go into too much detail because there's an awful lot of information about Calvados, but essentially it is a distilled product made from essentially a cider or perry base. Mainly in Normandy in northern France. The region is part of the overall AOC structure in France, so it's kind of subdivided into three AOCs, each of which have their own, obviously, rules and regulations you have to abide by to produce a product within that appellation. So the three are sort of Calvados AOC, which covers a large part of lower Normandy, and right, we're going to sort of start talking French words now, which I'm going to murder. So if you are French and you are listening to this, please cover your ears now. So it also covers certain parts of the departments of the Eure, the Seine Maritime, the Mayenne, the Sauve, and Oise, I believe is how you pronounce it. I don't know, I'm just guessing. These obviously areas can contain orchards, funny that, and apparently they can be grown in two ways, one called high stem and one called low stem. High stem orchards have a maximum density within the Calvados AOC of 280 trees per hectare and a minimum spacing of 5 metres between each tree. The maximum average yield of these orchards is 25 tonnes per hectare. If you are growing low stem, the orchards have a density of more than 280 trees per hectare and less than or equal to 1,000 trees per hectare with an average yield of 35 tonnes per hectare. So obviously you can cram more trees in basically. Of 35, in relative terms, 35% of the fruit used to make Calvados in the Calvados AOC comes from high stem orchards and is single distilled in, or mainly single distilled in a column still. The second and probably the more well known of the AOCs in Calvados is Pays, and this covers the eastern part of the region, including the communes or certain bits of the communes of Orne and Eure. Essentially exactly the same, high stem, low stem orchards. Generally speaking, about 45% of the fruit comes from high stem orchards. And here's the interesting bit that I didn't actually realise until I was doing my sort of research for the show, that in the Pays d'Auge, the cider must contain a minimum of 30% pears or perry pears. Also, they have to use a pot still. One would imagine sort of double distilled and so on and so forth. And this is where the kind of like sort of the conversation around the sort of the styles of Calvados happens. So obviously a lot of people think that the single distillation on a column still is going to give you a lighter sort of area kind of spirit, whereas obviously double distillation pot still gives you a heavier, weightier spirit, ages longer, etc., etc. And so you know, there is that conversation. And then there is a third AOC in Calvados called Calvados d'Enfrontin. I must admit, I haven't actually ever tasted a Calvados from that particular AOC. And it extends over the communes in Marche, Orne, Mayenne, and it again has the same structure of the other two regions, apart from generally high stem orchards cover about 80% of the area, and again it's distilled in a column still and aged for a minimum of 3 years, and I believe that covers the same for all the three AOCs, that they're aged for a minimum of 3 years in oak before release. So that's a little bit of information about the area itself, and like I said, we're looking at two producers. The first one is the Tortan, which is the family name, not the property. The family have been producing Calvados, I think, now for about 5 generations, and currently are producing Calvados in the Pays d'Auge, small town of Bouzeville, and it has been they have been in the property called Domaine de la Couturerie since 1971. Basically, they have an estate of 25 hectares, high stem trees, and they grow apparently 35 varieties of cider apples spread over 2 farms. Now, interesting thing is that although they are in the Pays d'Auge, they are only labelled, their products are only labelled as AOC Calvados. That is because they single distill in a column still. So this is going to be really interesting and really cool, because I can then taste, obviously, and see if there is a marked difference between the column still and the distillery Lecompte, who are a more traditional, obvious Pays d'Auge distillery, double distillation in a pot still, and obviously the Lecompte have been in production since about 1945 apparently. Currently the current cellar master and master distiller is a chap called Sylvain Pluchard, who I don't know, and they tend to use smaller barrels for their production. They use 180 litres and obviously blend together and produce a number of different age statements, of which I've got a couple. So obviously this is obviously not the whole range, and you know, so it's just a snapshot, but I thought it was going to be a really intriguing sort of look at the two different styles of Calvados. I mean, obviously I'd really love to have, you know, the third, but obviously I don't. So well, I guess that's enough waffle and information. Your probably head's going sort of like, oh my god, too much information. Let's just crack on and have a look at what I will be tasting. Right, okay, so I'm going to kick off with the Toutain, and the first bottling. Now, the one thing that I will say is all bottled at 40%, which again is really, really disappointing, it has to be said, that, but this is, we're talking France here, things don't change. You know, all of the sort of cognac, armagnac, brandy producers, call them whatever you like, just seem to be beheld to 40%, which is a real shame, but you know, that's obviously the way of these things. So the first bottling we'll be looking at is called the Vieille, It is 8 years old. 5 years of its life was spent in 30 to 40 hectolitre barrels, so relatively large barrels, with the final 3 years in smaller 15 to 20 hectolitre barrels. Bottle number 2, or sample number 2, is the Hors, which is 15 years old, aged again in the 2 different types of barrels, so larger barrels for 5 years and then 10 years in the smaller ones, so again looking to be quite interesting. Third sample we were looking at is called the Vieille Reserve, which basically means old, and it's 30 odd years old. I mean, look at that colour on that. I mean, that is an amazing colour, it has to be said. So this spent, and this has spent the entire 30 years in cask. It's not been sort of aged for about sort of 20 odd years and then shoved into demijohns. Nope. It's basically 15 years in the 10 to 15 hectolitre barrels, so the sort of, relatively small barrels, and then a further 15 years in even smaller barrels, 600 litres. So this is basically where it's picking up really all this colour from, so really looking forward to tasting that. And we're going to move on to the 2 Lecompte Calvadoses. This is the 5-year-old, so double distilled, and aged in moderately toasted French oak, or whatever moderately toasted is, but and then it's finished off, so it spends a period of time, I don't know the exact length of time, in these casks before being finished off in older casks, which I assume are a lot more inert, so they're not going to give too much more colour. And apparently these older casks are called russet barrels, apparently. So I've just learned so much just from sort of doing the research in today's episode of the show. It's really cool. And the second and final sample is the 12-year-old, so I believe aged in a very similar manner. So yeah, really looking forward to this. This is going to be something interesting. Hopefully you'll get lots of views, because people will be intrigued by the fact that I'm doing an episode of the show on Calvados. So let's kick off with the Tortan. Okay, so let's see what the nose gives us on the 8-year-old then, shall we? It's light, it's aromatic, it's airy, it's kind of typical cider apple note. There's a little bit of a floral note. It's got a lovely, you know, just spot on crisp apple character. A little bit of fleshier apple as well. Some green apple. Touch of apple blossom as well. I mean, that's lovely. That really is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, obviously, to enjoy Calvados, you would have to like apples. So if you don't like apples, then you're never going to like this stuff. But you know, this is spot on. This is what you would expect from a young, exuberant, fruity, column still distilled Calvados. Really elegant, light, fresh. Yeah. That's a sort of a lovely nose. Let's see what it passes on. Still light, fresh, elegant. Kicks off with the sort of green appley cider notes. Moves into wood notes on the mid palate. I'm getting a little bit of Oldham wood, a little bit of wood spice as well. And then that fresh apple character comes back again on the finish. Touching marzipan as well. Yeah. No, it's a lovely spirit, it has to be said. It's really well made. It's harmonious. Okay, it's not the most complex of spirits that I've ever tasted, but it has a lovely progression. Does what it says on the tin, you know, and isn't too expensive from memory, so yeah, that's a lovely starter. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Hors. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Right, so deeper nose, oilier. It's got more kind of stewed apple as opposed to fresh apple, bruised apple. touch of dark marzipan, some spices. Now that's a more serious nose, where you would sort of have maybe the Vieux as an aperitif. It's a light, sort of delicate aperitif. This is a more serious spirit, more weight to it. Obviously disproving the theory that column still distilled spirits are just light and have no weight to them. This has got a nice depth to it, lovely spiciness, and more obvious wood character. Just smells a lot more mature. Let's see what the palate like. That's a lovely palate. Obvious maturity, a lot more mature, but it has that sort of fresh apple, green apple note right on the edge, with that slight cidery note on the finish. But again, more darker wood spices, walnut, almost gingery kind of spices, maybe cardamom. It's got a lovely grip to it, lovely finish. The sort of, like I said, it kind of, again, kicks off with the sort of spirit character. The wood moves in on the mid palate and kind of continues in reality. But I just love that kind of darker appley character, that sort of more bruised, stewed apple. And that's a lovely spirit, it has to be said. But like I said, it's got this kind of lovely balance with that sort of little bit of sort of crisp apple note at the edge. I just think that is just an absolute fantastic spirit. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Vieille Reserve. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Oh, is that damn good, or is that damn good? I mean, that is wonderfully mature, sort of dark marzipan, leather, cardamom, beeswax, dark spices, stewed apple, walnut. I mean, that is a stunning spirit, it has to be said, ignoring the fact that, it's a Calvados, just sort of focusing on the quality and the complexity of the spirit. It's just fantastic stuff. There is a slight fresher apple note, but it's a lot more subtler for obvious reasons, but it's just there, just on the edge. But oh, the depth on that is absolutely stunning. Now, obviously, being a 30-year-old spirit, it isn't cheap, but it's a lot less expensive than a 30-year-old cognac. I can tell you that for a start. That is pretty damn good. Let's see what the palate's like. It really kicks off with all this lovely dark stewed fruit, walnut. It's got a lovely sweetness, off sweetness, I would say, more so than the Hordage. Again, darker, more wood notes on the mid palate, but it's got a lovely finish. It's got an almost citrus note. And along with that sort of fresher green appley sort of cider apple note coming through on the finish, which just lifts that finish and stops it being sort of overtly sort of dark, shall we say. And it just, that is just stunning. I mean, absolutely stunning. The balance, the complexity, the length on the palate, it is just a gorgeous spirit. And if you've got deep pockets, then definitely worth trying, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the two distillery Lecompte Calvadoses. This is the 5-year-old, Pays d'Auge 5-year-old. It is a more weightier spirit, there's no doubt about that. Sort of comparing it to the the first of the three Tortans, there is an obvious difference. It has an obvious pot still weight, more baked apple, got some lovely toasty oak notes, and almost kind of, it's got quite a sort of herbal note developing now. It's sort of almost kind of sort of agricole, kind of rummy, sort of herbally note coming through. Really very, very complex. Lovely weight to it. Good complexity. That is a wonderful nose. Let's see what the pal's like. Again, beautiful weight on the palate. I get more kind of mature cider apple. It tastes a lot older than just basically being 5 years old. It has that lovely weight and more of the stewed baked fruit. Certainly those kind of notes that I found on the Hordage, the Toutain Hordage. Big, toasty, weighty, good dollop of oak, but not overly oaked, really nicely balanced, lovely spiciness, good length. I mean, that is a serious spirit, it has to be said, and considering that's only 5 years old, that's got an awful lot going for it. Right, okay, so finishing off with the 12-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? A lot older, a lot darker. It's got that sort of lovely aged rancio, and it smells a lot older than 15. And one imagines 12, sorry. And one imagines that these two are probably blends of different age spirits, and although they have given them an age statement, that's obviously the minimum age of what has gone into the vatting, and I would be surprised if there isn't sort of maybe spirit that's up to about 20 odd years in this. It certainly has that maturity, that depth, dark honey, walnuts, spices, again a little bit of toasty oak, cinnamon. Stunning, absolutely stunning. And I know they do some very old spirit bottlings, and I imagine that they're just absolutely mind-blowingly good, but obviously unfortunately don't have those samples. But anyway, this is damn good. Let's see what it passes like. Velvety smooth. Again, tastes considerably older than 12. Rich, dark fruit, bruised apple, baked apple, dark spice, cinnamon, clove. Nice sweetness there as well. Nice appley sweetness kind of coming through on the finish. More spice. I mean, that is just a damn good spirit at the end of the day. It has to be said. The oak is bittering just very slightly on the finish, but that's not detracting. In fact, I would say that's making a lovely addition in actual fact. I just like that kind of slight bitterness at the end of a spirit, and I think that's just absolutely stunning. So yeah, damn good spirit. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, firstly, a big thank you to Bunch and Bushel for the Tortan samples, and a big thank you to the unknown distributor for the Lecompte samples. And, well, I think the tasting has certainly proved that, as I expected, that the use of different types of stills were going to have an impact upon the style of the spirit. You're probably going to go, well, duh, yeah, obviously. And, you know, it's just nice to sort of like, you know, have that kind of proven, I suppose. And the 8-year-old Tortan, I mean, that's just a delightful spirit. I mean, really fresh, appley, does exactly what it says on the tin, lovely aperitif, and you know, just an all round. It just goes, and this is the thing I often say about brandy, cognac, armagnac producers, that you know, most of them can produce, you know, something pretty good that's been sat in a cask for donkey's years. You know, just leave it in the cask and it will gain some relative complexity. To me, what is more important and more interesting is how good is the young spirit, because if the young spirit is exceptionally good, it just goes to show that basically by the time it's got to 30 or 40 years old, it's going to be mind-blowingly good. And certainly with regards to Tortan, I just think that just proves that in spades. The Hordage, again, absolutely gorgeous. Still retains that slight element of freshness, which is obviously coming from the column still, but it has more weight, a little bit more darkness, a little bit more complexity, more of the sort of the baked apple character as opposed to the fresh apple. And the Vieille Reserve, I mean, well, stunning spirit. I mean, I don't really care what it's been made from, whether it's been made from sort of, you know, grapes, barley, apples. I mean, the quality of that is just stunningly good, it has to be said, and certainly worth getting hold of if you're into good spirits. The Lecompte, again, great spirit, has to be said. Tastes a lot older than 5 years old, and I suspect that there is a lot older spirit at the core of both of these bottlings. Lovely richness, obvious pot still weight after having obviously tasted the column still distilled spirit. And obviously the 12-year-old, more age. I mean, you know, I just can't imagine how mind-blowing their older spirits are going to be, considering how damn good these two were. So, yeah, maybe, you know, one of these days I'll maybe do another episode of the show on Calvados. But, you know, if you've never had Calvados before, certainly worth checking out, because like all spirits, you know, cognac, armagnac, whiskey, whatever, you know, they have their nuances. They have, you know, each bottling has its sort of its kind of attraction, and certainly with regards to the Toutain range, which I would suggest that you certainly purchase from a certain merchant, because they're on the shelf. Do a bit of selling there. Although obviously, as you well know, any comments that I have made in today's episode of the show are wholly my own and have no bearing or relevance on the company that employs me, just to make that completely clear, even though I've said nice things about everything. So, we're all in a happy place, aren't we? So, yes, basically, if you've never tasted Calvados before, certainly pick up a bottling from either of these two producers, because all I can tell you is that you will not be disappointed, and you know, hopefully you'll get into it. Why not? Everybody needs another vice, don't they? So, you know, forget the cognacs, forget the armagnacs, get some decent Calvados. That's all I can say. So not long else to say apart from hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. A little bit different, I think. Good dramming and good afternoon.